This is yet another stupid, costly experiment by a prime minister and a governor who have no clue what they're doing. And this is just, I know this sounds a weird thing to say, but I just don't think ID cards are very English or very British.
Oh, really?
Yes, because they literally, what it says is essentially that you don't trust your own people. And it changes the relationship you have with the state. It means that you are kind of the property of the state. In England, in Britain, you're born free. When you have to have an ID card, you become a number, just like you would have a car number. So I just don't think it's a very British thing to have. But more what bothers me every bit as much as that is the fact that this will cost a lot of money and it will serve absolutely no purpose. And this guy keeps on shoving through policies and laws, and then when the public object, he then backtracks on them. Now, when you've made this many mistakes, it's not the fact you've backtracked on them is not going to gain you another single vote, not anywhere, because you've messed up people's lives, and they're not going to forgive you for that.
Yeah,
and people won't forgive him for this. I just think it's, I just think ID cards. I know people always say, well, if you've got nothing to hide, it shouldn't matter.
Imagine waking up in a country where your right to live, work, and move freely isn't secured by your citizenship or your birth certificate, but by a glitchy QR code on a state-run app that freezes at the worst possible moment. That was the direction Britain seemed to be heading, until a dramatic policy reversal forced the Prime Minister into a screeching U-turn that echoed across Westminster. The idea of reducing citizens to digital entries landed about as well as a surprise tax on a family tradition, and the backlash was swift. Carole Malone didn't just question the proposal, she dismantled it on live television, turning a polished tech vision into a public relations bonfire and leaving officials scrambling to regain their footing. Now Westminster is spinning so fast it could qualify for its own Olympic event, and the fallout is only getting louder. If you value bold commentary and straight-talking analysis from the British Report, make sure you subscribe and tap the notification bell, because while thousands tune in regularly, most still haven't joined the community. It costs nothing, takes a heartbeat, and genuinely helps us keep challenging those in power, so if you've already subscribed, respect. Now back to the storm gathering over Westminster. The studio lights were bright, but the mood was darker as Carole Malone stepped in front of the cameras. We've watched plenty of political acrobatics since Labour walked into number 10, yet the digital ID controversy stands apart, bigger, louder, harder to ignore. Malone didn't hedge or soften the edges, she went straight for the centre of it, delivering a broadcast broadside that echoed from Land's End to John O'Groats. For her, this wasn't a tech upgrade or a modern tweak, it was a line in the sand. She framed the mandatory digital ID plan as an expensive, reckless gamble pushed by a leadership drifting off course, wrapped in control-heavy instincts and polished talking points. At the heart of her fury was a simple conviction: this wasn't just policy, it was about identity, autonomy, and the character of the nation itself. She warned that we're drifting from being citizens with rights to becoming subjects managed by the system, maybe even assets logged and tracked. It's a striking comparison, and that's exactly why it landed. The second you're required to carry what feels like a digital tether, the balance between individual and state shifts in a way that's hard to ignore. Malone's argument was blunt: people are born free, not born to be catalogued in some Whitehall database as another entry on a spreadsheet. That kind of plain-spoken punch cuts through polished briefings and legal jargon, leaving cabinet soundbites sounding thin. And she didn't stop at civil liberties, she went straight for the cost. At a time when the Treasury insists every penny is scarce, pouring billions into a sweeping data scheme few demanded looks less like necessity and more like misplaced priorities. In her view, it wasn't modernization, it was overreach wrapped in expensive branding.
But the bottom line is, with an ID card, everything about you is on that card. And I don't trust this government and this Prime Minister to have respect for that information and to use it properly. I think it would be abused. We're heading towards an authoritarian state right now. And I think this would have been another step down that line.
The thing is, with ID cards for me, I just think, let's say I was a shady business owner, I own a restaurant, if I wanted to hire illegal immigrants, I'd hire them and just pay them cash in hand.
Of course you would.
Do you know what I mean? The ID card's going to make no difference to that.
No.
And it's certainly not going to stop the votes.
No.
Even if people had ID cards and we gave them the ID cards before they come to the country, they'll just get on the dinghy and when they get on the beach.
Of course.
No ID.
So we will be spending billions, no doubt, with introducing these. And what purpose are they going to serve, apart from making us the property of the state, apart from us having to hand over to the state everything about ourselves? And I just think people, I don't want to carry one. And what would happen to me and this is going to be interesting, what's going to happen to me if I haven't got one?
Yeah.
If they're not compulsory. If I've got a credit card, it's every bit as useful to a copper who stops me for something, or if I have a pass card to get into this building.
Yeah.
It's every bit as useful as an ID card is going to be. So why are we going to waste billions of pounds that we don't?
And here's where it turns sharply uncomfortable. While Malone was dismantling the proposal on live TV, the government was already edging into reverse. If you've been watching closely, you'll have noticed a pattern: bold declarations followed by rapid recalculations. Not long ago, on the eve of the party conference, the Prime Minister sounded unwavering, making it clear that working in the UK would require digital ID. It was delivered with absolute certainty. Now, that certainty has melted away, and the once ironclad requirement suddenly looks fragile. Cue the Chancellor, stepping forward to steady the narrative, stressing that proof of the right to work will of course remain mandatory, as it always has been, but suggesting it may not hinge entirely on the flagship digital ID system after all. In other words, the edges are being softened, the language carefully adjusted, and the grand rollout quietly diluted in record time. Malone didn't miss the political reality either. She argued that a last-minute reversal won't magically repair the damage when voters feel they've been pushed and pulled for months. People don't respond well to being told their ability to earn a living hinges on a policy that can't hold its own shape for half a year. Meanwhile, the opposition has been enjoying the spectacle at Prime Minister's questions. The Conservative leader wasted no time welcoming the retreat, branding the mandatory digital ID plan a failed idea from the start. It's a tough spot when even the architect of the policy struggles to defend it. At the dispatch box, the Prime Minister leaned heavily on technicalities and legal language, sidestepping the very phrase that once defined his stance. To many watching at home, it felt less like leadership and more like damage control unfolding in real time. The contrast is striking: a government that speaks often about honoring public trust, yet advances a proposal critics say signals the exact opposite. In Malone's framing, the message behind a mandatory scheme feels blunt: we don't trust you. It risks casting ordinary workers as problems to be cleared by a system rather than citizens presumed lawful by default. Her warning, shared by plenty of critics, is that once you normalize heavy centralized oversight in one area, it becomes easier to expand it elsewhere. Today it's employment verification, tomorrow, who knows what else gets folded into the same framework. History has shown that when broad control mechanisms are built, governments are often tempted to stretch their reach. And this controversy doesn't sit in isolation. It lands on top of a string of policy reversals that have chipped away at the government's image of steadiness. Business rate changes floated then dropped after fierce pushback, tax proposals softened after industry uproar, headline ideas reworked under pressure. Fair or not, the narrative taking hold is one of drift, bold announcements followed by hurried retreats. For critics, that pattern is becoming the real story.
This doesn't happen very often, so brace yourselves, because I just might, have a little bit of good news for you. Something that's just literally broken not that long ago. You know, the very, very unpopular proposals to have mandatory digital ID. This was a bit of a passion project, shall we say, for Keir Starmer. Well, now, if rumours are to be believed, conversations are taking place at a senior level to actually remove the mandatory aspect of this proposal. So instead of people being forced to have digital ID to prove their right to work in this country, it would perhaps now be moving to be an optional aspect.
Officials are now reframing the retreat as part of a thoughtful consultation, insisting they always intended to listen. That's a neat line, but it only surfaced after the backlash hit full force. The more convincing read is that they ran straight into public resistance and swerved. Now the door is open to making the entire digital ID scheme voluntary, which raises the obvious question Malone hammered home. If participation is optional, why funnel millions into building a system people can bypass? It starts to feel less like strategy and more like expensive improvisation. And for the Prime Minister, every reversal trims a little more authority from the office he promised would restore steadiness. A vision that shifts whenever pressure rises doesn't project strength, it projects uncertainty. Malone's sharpest edge, though, was about trust. She made clear she has little faith in the government's ability to protect vast pools of personal data, arguing that once information is centralized, the risks multiply just as quickly as the reassurances. And can you really fault the skepticism? After years of high-profile data leaks and costly IT misfires, asking people to consolidate their entire digital footprint under one uncertain system is a tough sell. Trust isn't built on promises alone, it's built on competence and consistency, and critics argue both have looked shaky. The government says the objective was to tackle illegal working, which on the surface sounds reasonable, but the UK already relies on passports, birth certificates, and national insurance numbers to verify status. That's why opponents question whether a centralized digital ID is a necessary upgrade or an oversized answer to a problem that already has tools in place. To them, it feels less like precision policy and more like data accumulation dressed up as reform. Malone's commentary struck a nerve because it went beyond party politics. It tapped into a deep-rooted cultural instinct toward personal autonomy. Her message echoed a familiar sentiment: this isn't a society built on constant credential checks, but on the assumption of individual responsibility and limited state intrusion. To critics, the notion of needing a state-issued digital pass just to clock in for an honest day's work cuts against a long-held sense of independence. Malone framed it as a line the public simply won't cross, arguing that once policy starts to feel imposed from above, resistance hardens fast. That leaves the Prime Minister in a tight squeeze. Advisors and policy experts talk up efficiency, modernization, and streamlined systems, while media voices, opposition figures, and a frustrated public pushback insisting that government answers to the people, not the reverse. The pattern forming is hard to ignore: bold rollouts followed by cautious retreats, and it's beginning to define the narrative around his leadership. The digital ID debate isn't finished. A formal consultation is on the horizon, which may reset the language and repackage the proposal. But politically, the moment has already shifted. The firm stance has softened, the certainty has faded, and many observers now see a government testing the limits of control, only to discover those limits pushback. Malone's on her dismantling of the Prime Minister went far beyond digital IDs. It was a critique of a leadership that puts red tape above rights and data above people. The most revealing signal. The backbench stayed quiet. When your own MPs can't, or won't, defend a headline policy, you know the tide has turned. They see that the public won't quietly accept being treated like state property. Farmers, pub owners, everyday citizens, and now even parts of the government are hearing that message loud and clear, whether they admit it or not. It's a strange scene. One day the future is digital IDs, the next it's Rachel Reeves softening the narrative, turning mandatory into optional-ish. It's almost laughable, if it weren't about public money and personal freedoms. But as long as voices like Malone's keep calling out the absurdity, there's hope that Britons can hold onto the freedom they were born with. And you can count on the British Report to keep watching every U-turn, pivot, and tense PMC showdown, making sure nothing happening behind number 10's black doors goes unnoticed. Thank you for tuning in.